start with this. Well, there appears to be a rumor swirling due to an image floating around Instagram off the Instagram page of Fernando Vargas Jr., the son of Fernando Vargas. Fernando. And, it seems to state that Charles Martin, former IBF heavyweight champion Charles Martin, is set to lock horns with Deontay Wilder in his very next fight. I want to say that this is a fight that should have happened a long time ago. The second that Charles Martin procured that IBF title, the people over there at PBC, Wilder's handlers, Shelly Finkel, JD's, Al Heyman, they should have done what they had to do to see about making Wilder a unified champion.
They didn't.
They bottled it. They squandered that opportunity the way they squandered the opportunity to have Leo and Gary unify titles with each other. They allowed Anthony Joshua to beat them to the punch, to beat them to that IBF title that is already on their side of the street.
Good job.
Here we are. Anthony provided Charles Martin with a payday that Charles perhaps couldn't have got fighting Deontay Wilder, as Deontay Wilder wasn't making the kind of money they put up for Charles Martin. Not at that time.
He wasn't.
They offered Charlie something like, $5-6 million? I heard $7 in some cycles. Deontay Wilder wasn't making that kind of scratch.
Couldn't match it.
At that time. And, that's likely why they jumped on that opportunity, though it was a rather short-sighted course of action. Because we know that they were very much invested in Deontay Wilder. They spent millions trying to make this guy a pay-per-view attraction, a pay-per-view star. Millions that have all but been flushed down the drain. Think that had they capitalized on that opportunity all those years ago, perhaps Wilder would have been in a different place.
Be unified.
Perhaps he would have had a bit more leverage, more bargaining power.
Be unified.
But, the past, as they say, is the past.
It's ancient history now.
Here now, in 2021, the rumor seems to be that Charles Martin could very well be the next guy that Deontay Wilder fights. What do I think about this? What do I think about this potential news? Well, if we take away the fan-driven spiel, the fan-driven rhetoric, the narratives, the agendas, the propaganda, if we take all of that away and just focus on the fight, focus on the boxing, it's actually not a bad matchup, depending on how you bill it. You see, this ain't a pay-per-view worthy fight.
Not by itself.
I mean, it's not. If it were part of a package deal, that maybe you get Deontay Wilder versus Charles Martin and
What they got?
a bargain with Andy Ruiz versus Luis Ortiz fighting on the same card. If you bill it that way, then you could argue it's value for money. But by itself, the fight ain't pay-per-view worthy.
Are they going to bill it as a pay-per-view?
That's the question. In order to satisfy the financial demands, what Wilder hopes to make for a fight, per fight, are they going to so decide to bill this fight, this potential matchup, as a pay-per-view? That's the question. I've long said that, what Deontay Wilder hopes to make for a fight has less to do with his earning power, his ability to generate revenue, and more to do with what looked to be a signing bonus that DAZN offered him. We know, quite famously, DAZN offered Deontay Wilder $20 million to have that Dominic Breazeale fight on their platform.
You remember that?
That $20 million that they offered Deontay Wilder, that wasn't based on his marquee value. That wasn't based on his earning power. That was based on the projected earning power of a potential Anthony Joshua fight. They were willing to give this guy $20 million to come over to their side of things to secure him for the Anthony Joshua fight. In that way, it was more of a signing bonus than anything else. Instead, he chose to turn down the money, stayed on the Showtime side of things for at least one fight.
One more.
And Showtime broke the bank, broke their budget, trying to match what DAZN offered this guy. That's money that they never got back.
Money that got fucking flushed down the toilet.
And Deontay Wilder receiving a dollar amount that well exceeded his own earning power, his own marquee value, he likely became accustomed to receiving that dollar amount.
Of course, look at what they gave him for the second Tyson Fury fight.
They gave that fucking guy $30 million. $30 million guaranteed for that pay-per-view. For that pay-per-view that didn't even break even. Yet another instance where money was poured into Deontay Wilder to try and make him a pay-per-view star, try and make him a pay-per-view attraction, and he couldn't bring it back.
You overpaid him.
You guys have been overpaying him. Based on DAZN overpaying him.
Being willing to.
That time, DAZN had that kind of scratch to throw around. Showtime, not so much, as we see that as soon as Showtime tried to match what DAZN was offering Deontay Wilder, just a fraction of it. They broke their budget, and this guy ended up somewhere else in his very next fight. And that's what denotes the overpayment, that what the fighter hopes to make per fight far exceeds that fighter's ability to generate revenue. You want these guys to pay you more than you're worth. And rest assured, you're worth something, because this is a numbers game, and the numbers, they don't lie. They couldn't have made the money they poured into you off the Brazil fight, because the Brazil fight wasn't even a pay-per-view. They couldn't have made that money back off the Luis Ortiz pay-per-view. Actually was a pay-per-view, but they couldn't have made the money back with that because that pay-per-view flopped.
It tanked.
And they couldn't have made the money back in the Tyson Fury rematch, that pay-per-view, because they poured even more money into Deontay Wilder for that fight, and that fight failed to break even. It's yet another pay-per-view that flopped, though granted, it performed better than the first Tyson Fury versus Deontay Wilder pay-per-view. It did. It brought in more pay-per-view buys, 2 times as many, but 2 times as many wasn't enough to cover the costs. What it took, what it costed to make the fight and to promote it, to advertise it. You'll notice a glaring difference in the guarantees for Wilder and Fury in their first fight and their second fight. In their first fight, both of these guys were only guaranteed a couple mil apiece.
That's it.
The sum total of their guarantees came up to a paltry, $7 million? In their rematch, Wilder's guaranteed $30 million, and Tyson Fury's guaranteed $30 million. A sum total of $60 million. Guaranteed purses. You'd have to sell well over 1 million pay-per-view buys in order to cover those expenses, cover those costs. And this pay-per-view, it didn't do 1 million pay-per-view buys. So, here we are. I think about that, Deontay Wilder has grown accustomed to getting a certain amount of money per fight. An overpayment, if you will. And I wonder, are they going to try to build this potential Charles Martin fight as a pay-per-view in order to satisfy Deontay Wilder's demands, in order to pay this guy? Because, the networks, they ain't going to pay him what he wants, so they're going to likely rely on the fans to flip the bill. I mean, that's essentially how the pay-per-view model works. They actually tried to stage Wilder versus Martin as a pay-per-view.
I don't put it past them.
They had the fucking audacity to stage that Ortiz rematch as a pay-per-view, even though nobody was asking for it.
They might try to do that with this.
I want to say that on regular television, Wilder's ring return against Charles Martin or someone else, I want to say that his ring return on regular television could do great ratings.
Regular television.
Not pay-per-view. On regular television, however, yeah, he probably can put up some decent numbers.
Get some attention.
Very good viewing figures. And that's the question. If he is going to fight Charles Martin in his very next fight, and that fight is set to go down sometime in the near future, how do they plan on billing it? I think that what the Wilder people are waiting for is for the Anthony Joshua versus Tyson Fury fight to officially be announced. Over the years, we've noticed that, Wilder has tried to attach himself to Anthony Joshua and whatever news, whatever rumblings he's making to try and feed off of his energy, his synergy, if you will. And I think that Wilder and his people are waiting for that fight to officially be announced so that they can then announce Deontay Wilder's next fight. Because the truth of it is, Deontay Wilder likely won't get the opportunity to fight for a title for at least the next 12 months. Maybe longer. Anthony Joshua versus Tyson Fury might turn out to be a 2-fight engagement. And after that engagement is all said and done, Alexander Usyk or whoever is, the WBO's mandatory by that time, there will be that fighter to consider. It may be a while before Deontay Wilder even gets the chance to sniff at a world title, much less fight for one. So in the in-between time, they've got to try and keep him relevant. And one way that they can do that is by doing what they've been doing, coattailing what Anthony Joshua is doing, coattailing whatever fight he's got lined up, trying to attach Wilder news with Anthony Joshua news. Removing the fan rhetoric, the agenda-driven spiel that we've all come to know and love here on YouTube, I want to say that the Charles Martin fight actually isn't a bad fight. It makes sense. Charles Martin and Deontay Wilder have both been out of action the same amount of time. Charles Martin last fought on the undercard of Wilder versus Fury 2 back in February of last year. Charles is coming off of 3 consecutive victories, whereas Wilder, as we all know, is coming off that loss to Tyson Fury. I actually think it's a fight that makes sense. It's the ideal kind of fight to try and bounce back from. It does have the potential to be a banana peel in the sense that if Wilder don't dispatch Charles Martin as easily as Anthony Joshua dispatched Charles Martin many years ago when he was an unbeaten fighter and a reigning world champion, if Wilder, if his performance ain't up to scratch, it might hurt his stock. And I understand that, styles make fights and triangle theories don't work. I get all of that. It's just that boxing fans often are short-sighted and don't give much thought to their critiques, their criticisms. So there is some pressure for Wilder to get back out there, not just get back out there, but get back out there and look good. Get back out there and look good as everyone else.
They might have him fight Charles Martin, and if he wins, Andy Ruiz.
Try and build that as a pay-per-view. Market it to the Chicano fans that, as we all know in this country, move the needle. That's what I think is going on. So all we can do now is wait for Anthony Joshua to announce his news so that Deontay Wilder, in turn, can follow suit and announce his news. Let's wait and see what happens. In other news, Adrian Broner is making news ahead of his February 13th fight date. He was supposed to be fighting some guy named Campa, but Campa ended up pulling out. Not that it matters. I wasn't excited for Adrian Broner's return. I'm not. I don't know if you guys are, but
I don't give a shit.
There's a lot of talk about Broner's physique, how he seems to be quote-unquote focused. Something that's been a running gag in the career of Adrian Broner the last couple of years. It's gotten to the point where people actually celebrate Broner making weight, assuming that he does, assuming he will. It's gotten to that point with this guy. And
it's fucking mediocre.
Oh, that might seem like a harsh criticism. That might seem like a snap judgment. But Adrian Broner is a fighter who's, for some reason, considered a big name in the sport of boxing in some circles, small circles, and for what reason, I don't know, because he hasn't been a world champion in years. He's not competing at that level. He seems to get opportunities off of his mouthpiece and his mouthpiece alone, but when it's time to get out there under those hot lights and actually perform, he always falters, or at least he has been the last couple of years. The guy hasn't won a fight.
What was it, 2017?
That was 4 years ago. So, that being said, guy hasn't won a fight 4 years.
He's been inactive for about 2.
Last time the guy saw any action was in January of 2019.
It's 2 years.
From January of 2019 to January of 2020 to January of 2021, Adrian Broner hasn't seen any action.
So why would I be excited he's coming back?
They aren't fattening Adrian Broner up for someone. Who? Not quite sure yet. Maybe it's Regis Pregarius. Maybe it's Keith Thurman. Keith Thurman could do with a little tune-up fight. He needs to be involved in some kind of situation since he's not having any luck with Errol Spence Jr. or Terrence Crawford.
They'll give Adrian a little tune-up fight.
And maybe they'll throw him in there with either Regis Pregarius, provided that Regis Pregarius is still on that side of the street, or, maybe they throw him in there with Keith Thurman.
But it's Broner, so who really gives a shit?
Finally, per tweet from Michael Benson, Mauricio Suleiman has revealed the WBC have ordered Gary Russell Jr. to defend his featherweight title versus Ray Vargas next. This news caught my attention because I've been waiting to see what the hell Ray Vargas is going to do for a while now. You got to understand, Ray Vargas hasn't had a fight since July of 2019. Since then, in January of 2020, the beginning of last year, he decided to cross over to the PBC side of things, but we haven't seen him since. And apparently the news now is he has
left 122,
moved up in weight, and become the mandatory challenger for Gary Russell Jr.'s title at 126 pounds, featherweight.
Anybody can see what's going on here.
Ray broke his leg a couple of months ago, was labeled a champion in recess by the WBC. At some point, Luis Neri becomes the WBC champion. Thereafter, and now what are we looking at? Ray is going to 126. Those of you that have managed to catch some of my live streams will have heard this before, but I think that Ray Vargas was perhaps given financial compensation to delay his ring return, perhaps even given financial compensation to vacate his WBC title, make it available for yet another PBC fighter, Luis Neri. Because, it's not the first time I've seen something like this happen. Lest we forget, a couple of years ago, Peter Quillen was convinced to throw his WBO title, his middleweight title, in the air upon being ordered to fight Matt Korobov.
Remember that?
Rock Nation had won the price bid for the fight, and we all know that Al Heyman, Peter Quillen's advisor, he has a strained relationship with Rock Nation. Upon this order coming down, Peter Quillen decides he doesn't want to be a full-fledged champion anymore, throws the belt in the air, decides to pick up a WBA baby belt as a substitute.
Sound familiar?
I think about that, and I look at this, and you know, kind of feels like the same thing. Maybe they talked Ray into throwing that belt in the air. He becomes the mandatory challenger for a belt at 126 pounds, he himself having not fought since July of 2019. I mean, how ethical is this? The last time that Ray was in action was well over a year ago, and it wasn't at 126, it was at 122. Basically, they're making this guy food for Gary. That's what they're doing. They're bringing up a little guy for Gary to fight. These are not favorable circumstances for Ray. You know, the story is that Ray broke his leg. I'm not completely convinced that he did, though if I take the story at face value, you're talking about a fighter who stayed out of the ring as a result of breaking his leg, hasn't fought anybody in over a year. This will essentially be his ascent to the featherweight division, and his first fight there, he's fighting a world champion off of a year of inactivity, well over a year of inactivity. How's it look? They're serving Ray up on a platter for Gary. That's what they're doing.
Bringing up a little guy for Gary to feast on.
Same way they brought up all those other little guys for Gervonta Davis to feast on. The kind of little guys they hope galvanize the Chicano fans to get them interested in these kinds of mismatches. Because, I mean, I think Ray versus Gary, under these circumstances, that's kind of a mismatch.
What kind of chances can you give him?
Ray Vargas ain't proven as a featherweight. What elite level scalps has he collected there? And the guy hasn't fought in over a year. So whatever he did over a year ago. And guess what? It wasn't even at featherweight. They're serving Ray up on a platter for Gary Russell Jr. That's what's going on. It's not surprising.
But hey, Ray's the one that decided to go over there.
He could have saw about having a unification match with Top Rank's Emmanuel Navarrete. That would have made for a sensational fight. Ray, you know, chose to go the other way. He chose to go to PBC Island.
Made his bed, now he has to lie in it.